The man standing at the back of the room with a pair of child's purple mittens in his hand was not who anyone expected to walk out of that building with the job. He was 40 years old, medium height, wearing a navy wool jacket that had been nice once but had gone slightly shapeless at the elbows. His hair was dark with threads of gray at the temples. His eyes were a quiet, unremarkable brown that carried the particular kind of tiredness that belongs to people who have not slept well in several years. He had arrived at the Fortis Executive Protection Training Facility on Adelaide Street East in downtown Toronto at exactly 7:59, carrying a gym bag in one hand and a small pair of purple wool mittens in the other. The mittens belonged to his daughter. Adelaide, Addie, was 8 years old and had left them on the back seat of his truck during the school drop-off that morning. He hadn't had time to run them back to her cubby at St. Michael's. The assessment began at 8 o'clock sharp and a late arrival meant automatic disqualification. He had tucked the mittens into his jacket pocket and walked through the front door. Around him, 24 of the most credentialed private security contractors in the country were doing what credentialed people in competitive rooms always do, making sure everyone else knew exactly how credentialed they were. There were former members of Joint Task Force 2 rolling their shoulders in brand-name athletic gear. There were ex-Mounties with RCMP tactical ribbons still printed on their CVs. There were men who had done extraction work in Kabul and Bogota and the Sahel, men who wore their histories on their forearms in ink and on their faces in scar tissue. Tristan stood quietly near the edge of the mat, one hand resting in his pocket, his thumb working slowly over the soft wool of Addie's mittens. 32 seconds after the physical assessment round began, the room's most formidable fighter, Knox Dunbar, 6'2", 220 pounds, former JTF-2 operator and the current frontrunner for the contract, was lying face down on the training mat. The thud of his body hitting the floor shook the equipment rack mounted to the far wall. And Delphine Aubert, standing at the observation window on the mezzanine level with her arms at her sides and her carefully composed expression completely unraveled, was staring at Tristan Hollis as though she had never seen a human being before. The morning had started the way November mornings in Toronto tend to start, gray, with a wind off the lake that found every gap in your coat collar. Tristan had dropped Addie at school at 7:40, walked her to the door because she liked it when he did, watched her disappear into the yellow-lit lobby with her backpack bouncing. She had turned back once at the door and waved both hands at him, the way she did when she was happy. He had driven to the assessment center with the heater running and a travel mug of coffee going cold in the cup holder, thinking about her follow-up appointment on Thursday, thinking about what Dr. OC at Sick Kids had said about the experimental graft procedure, thinking about the number on the quote the insurance company had sent back stamped denied. Addie had been born with a rare congenital cardiac anomaly, one of those phrases that sounds manageable until the cardiologist lays out what it actually means over the next 10 years. The standard treatments had done what they could. The next step, the one that could genuinely extend her quality of life, was a procedure not yet covered under OHIP, not yet covered under his policy through his old employer, and not yet available at any public hospital in the province. It was available at one clinic in Montreal. It cost $180,000. His savings, after 2 years of fighting with the insurance company, were essentially gone. The posting for the head of personal security position at Aubert Capital Partners had appeared 2 weeks earlier. The contract was $210,000 per year. He had applied within the hour. The Fortis facility was a converted warehouse space, 3 floors of polished concrete, rubberized flooring, and the faint chemical smell of dry erase markers and cleaning solvent. The main training floor was built to impress, a full firing range in the basement, a scenario simulation suite on the second level, and a wide-open ground floor mat space that could accommodate a dozen simultaneous assessment drills. A man named Raymond Callister ran the room. He was Aubert Capital's current director of corporate security, late 50s, silver hair brushed precisely to one side, a suit that had been expensive about 4 years ago. He stood on the upper mezzanine beside the CEO herself, with a clipboard in one hand and the particular expression of a man who already knows exactly how today is going to go. Delphine Aubert did not look like she shared that confidence. She was 37, the daughter of a Quebecois investment banker and a Haitian-Canadian structural engineer, and she had built Aubert Capital Partners from a boutique fixed-income shop into one of the most respected asset management firms on Bay Street in under a decade. She wore a charcoal blazer over a burgundy silk blouse, her black hair pinned back, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes moved constantly over the candidates below, cataloging and weighing. 3 weeks prior, Meridian Group, a rival hedge fund that had been trying to acquire Aubert Capital for 18 months, had sent a message, not a letter. Someone had accessed her private parking bay in the building's underground garage, disabled the cameras, and placed a folded piece of paper under her windshield wiper. It contained her daughter's school address and her morning drop-off time. She didn't have a daughter, but she understood the message perfectly. The police had advised her to increase her security detail. Her board had advised her to accept Meridian's acquisition offer. She had done neither. Instead, she had called Callister and told him to run the most rigorous security assessment he could design and find her someone who could actually think. "They all look alike," she said quietly, watching the candidates below. Callister glanced over. "They're professionals, Delphine. Dunbar, specifically, he's done executive protection work in Dubai and Sao Paulo. He's the best candidate by a significant margin." Delphine's gaze drifted past Dunbar, who was loudly demonstrating something to a neighboring candidate using his own forearm as a prop, and stopped on the man standing quietly by the edge of the mat. He was holding something small and purple. "Who is that one?" she said. Callister squinted. "Hollis." His application file was sparse, some kind of consultant work. He barely cleared the background check. He made a small note on his clipboard. "He won't last the first phase." Delphine watched Tristan for another moment, while everyone else in the room burned nervous energy, stretching, pacing, making eye contact with rivals. He simply stood there. His breathing was visible and slow. He looked at the exits. He looked at the ceiling. He looked back down at whatever was in his hand. "We'll see," she said. The first phase was a tactical risk analysis scenario. Callister's team had constructed a detailed model of Aubert Capital's primary boardroom on the second floor of the facility. Same dimensions, same furniture layout, same entry and exit points. Each candidate was given 5 minutes inside the room to identify security vulnerabilities and rank them by severity. Knox Dunbar went first. He came out 4 minutes later with a confident list. The glass exterior wall was a sniper exposure risk. The primary door had a weak latch, and the emergency exit behind the credenza was blocked by a catering cart. The assessors nodded. It was a solid, competent list. When Tristan entered the room, he didn't go to the windows or the doors. He stood in the center for 30 seconds without moving. Then he walked slowly along the perimeter, running his fingertips briefly along the underside of the conference table. He came out in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. "The glass is a secondary concern," he said. "The building across Adelaide is residential, not commercial. No viable elevated firing line from that angle at this floor level. The real vulnerability is the ventilation panel in the northeast corner. It's been re-secured with the wrong fastener type, hex screws instead of the original flatheads. Someone accessed that panel recently, and it wasn't facilities management, because the maintenance log by the door hasn't been updated since August." Callister's pen hovered above his clipboard. "There's also a wireless signal repeater zip-tied to the back leg of the credenza. I can only see the edge of it, but it's not part of any standard AV equipment configuration I recognize. Someone installed a device in that room. I'd recommend sweeping it for surveillance hardware before Ms. Aubert uses it again." The silence that followed had a particular quality to it, the quiet of a room recalibrating. Up on the mezzanine, Delphine had straightened slightly. She pressed the intercom. Mr. Hollis, how did you identify the fasteners on a ventilation panel from across the room? I didn't identify them from across the room, Tristan said, looking up at the camera mounted in the corner. I identified them when I was standing next to them, but I noticed the panel because of the light. The paint along one edge is fractionally brighter than the surrounding wall. Fresh touch-up. Someone tried to make it look undisturbed. They just used paint that was slightly too new. Delphine sat back. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. On the floor below, Knox Dunbar was watching Tristan walk back to his spot near the edge of the mat. Dunbar had the broad-shouldered stillness of a man who didn't need to physically move to project menace. Nice parlor trick, Dunbar said, not loudly, just loud enough. But the job isn't finding loose screws in a mock-up. When someone actually comes for her, it goes loud fast. And a quiet guy with good eyes doesn't mean anything when the shooting starts. Tristan looked at him briefly, the way you look at weather. I know, he said, and looked away. The second phase was a live fire assessment in the basement range. The temperature was kept low. Callister's design, meant to simulate the physiological stress of outdoor threat scenarios in a Canadian winter. Strobe units mounted to the ceiling activated at random intervals. The task, 3 targets, 2 minutes, evaluated on placement, speed, and threat neutralization logic. Dunbar handled it like a machine. He moved on the targets fast and hard, double-tapping center mass on each in under 40 seconds. Clean, aggressive, textbook. The other candidates nodded. Tristan took the standard issue Glock from the table. He didn't roll his shoulders or adjust his stance. He picked it up, confirmed the chamber, and stood at the line. The strobes began, the timer started. He fired 6 shots, slower than Dunbar, significantly slower. 2 of the other candidates snickered from behind the observation glass. When Callister pulled the targets, the room went quiet again. 3 shots had struck the weapon-bearing hand of each silhouette, not grouped near the center, not in the head, precisely, deliberately, through the hand. Center mass is standard, Callister said, writing. This is unconventional. A strobe environment at close range shifts depth perception, Tristan said, ejecting the magazine. Headshots require a static or predictable target. These 3 targets were programmed to oscillate. I could see the motor track on the mounting rail. A center mass shot still works, but the margin for error climbs. The hand is a smaller target, but it's consistent. Neutralize the weapon, you neutralize the threat. It doesn't matter how large the person is. He set the weapon back on the table. If your principal is standing 3 meters away, a through-and-through center mass round is also a risk to the principal. A hand shot stops the gun, that's the job. Up in the observation suite, Callister turned to Delphine. He's slower than the others. He's more precise than the others, she said. Keep him in. Delphine. Keep him in, Raymond. By the time the physical assessment began in the late afternoon, 8 candidates remained. The mat space had been cleared and a padded combat ring assembled at the center. The rules were standard. No eye strikes, no groin shots, everything else permitted. Assessment ended on submission or adjudicator call. Tristan had watched the early rounds from the sideline. He had removed his wool jacket, folded it carefully, and set it on top of his gym bag. Beside it, slightly crumpled but intact, were Addie's purple mittens. Knox Dunbar ended his first bout in 42 seconds. His opponent, a former RCMP emergency response officer, not a small man, was in a standing rear choke before he'd landed his second jab. Dunbar released him at the edge of unconsciousness and stepped back with the casual composure of a man who had barely been inconvenienced. Several of the remaining candidates visibly reassessed their odds. Callister looked at his clipboard. Hollis. Dunbar turned from the center of the ring. He looked at the other candidate, a compact former infantry officer, then looked at Tristan and said, "Give me the quiet one." Callister glanced toward the mezzanine. Delphine gave a single nod. Dunbar and Hollis. Tristan stepped onto the mat. He didn't adopt a guard stance. He didn't bounce or roll his neck. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart and his hands open at his sides, and he looked at Dunbar the way a man looks at something he is about to move around. Dunbar grinned and said something low enough that only the mat heard it. Begin. Dunbar came in fast, the way big experienced fighters do, not wild, not angry, but with the full committed force of a man who has ended encounters in the first 5 seconds before and was prepared to do it again. He threw a right cross, tight and precise, aimed at Tristan's jaw with the full weight of his body behind it. Tristan moved his head 4 centimeters to the outside. The fist passed his ear. The swing carried Dunbar's center of gravity forward. A fraction, but enough. Tristan stepped inside. He didn't throw a punch. He brought his left hand up and struck Dunbar at the hinge of the jaw with an open palm, not to damage, but to scramble the inner ear fluid, a technique that requires knowing exactly where to apply pressure and how much. Dunbar's eyes went briefly unfocused. In the same motion, Tristan's right arm came across Dunbar's chest as a frame, and his right leg swept behind Dunbar's lead ankle. The throw landed Dunbar flat on his back with a crack that resonated through the floorboards. Before Dunbar could process the fall, Tristan had dropped with him, transitioned his weight, and snaked his arm under Dunbar's jaw in a rear naked choke. He didn't squeeze with his arms. He expanded through the chest and arched his back, closing the carotid artery on both sides with surgical evenness. Dunbar's hands came up, searching, grasping, but Tristan's positioning left him nothing to grab. He was behind the man like a shadow, like something Dunbar couldn't reach no matter which direction he turned. 5 seconds, Dunbar's movements became heavier. 10 seconds, his hands dropped. 14 seconds, he went still. Tristan held the position for 2 more seconds, then released and stood. He wasn't breathing hard. He smoothed the front of his t-shirt, walked off the mat, picked up Addie's mittens from the top of his jacket, and checked the time. The silence in the facility was the particular kind that happens when a room full of people simultaneously revises its understanding of what just occurred. Raymond Callister had stopped writing. On the mezzanine, Delphine Aubert had both hands pressed flat against the observation glass. Her expression had shed every professional layer it usually maintained. "Raymond," she said, and her voice was not quite steady. "Yes. Hire him." The offer was signed the following morning in Delphine's corner office on the 38th floor of the Aubert Capitol building on Bay Street, with Lake Ontario spreading flat and pewter gray in every window behind her. Tristan sat across from her in the same navy wool jacket. He looked, in the polished context of that office, almost comic. Almost. Callister stood to one side with his arms folded and his face carefully arranged into something professional. He had spent the previous evening sending Delphine 3 separate memos outlining his reservations. She had read them all and not replied to any of them. "The contract is as discussed," Delphine said, sliding the folder across the desk. $210 per year. Full benefits. Expense account for any operational requirements." She paused. "I also spent last evening reviewing your background more thoroughly than your application allowed." Tristan was quiet. "You were with CSIS for 11 years. Ground Branch Operations Division. The redactions in your file cover 3 active status postings in environments I'm not going to name in this office. You weren't a consultant, Mr. Hollis. You were an intelligence operative." "I have a daughter," Tristan said. "The work stopped being compatible with that. My wife passed away 4 years ago. After that, there was no one else to be her parent, so I left." Delphine was still for a moment. "Adelaide, 8 years old. She has a cardiac condition. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the secondary variant." She said it carefully, pronouncing the medical term with the precision of someone who had looked it up that morning. "The experimental procedure at the Fontaine Cardiac Institute in Montreal. Your insurance denied the claim last spring." The muscle in Tristan's jaw moved, almost imperceptibly. "That's why you're here," Delphine said. "Yes." She slid a second document across the desk. It was a wire transfer confirmation. The amount was $182,000. The recipient was the Fontaine Cardiac Institute, Montreal. I called the Institute at 7 o'clock this morning, Delphine said. Aubert Capital is now the primary sponsor of their pediatric cardiology research program. Adelaide's procedure is scheduled for the 14th of next month, fully covered. Tristan looked at the document. He didn't move for several seconds. Something shifted in his face. Not breaking, exactly. More like a wall that had been load-bearing for a very long time, recognizing, for the first time, that it could rest. He looked up at her. You didn't have to do that before I signed anything. No, Delphine said simply. I didn't. She held his gaze. Don't make me regret the order of operations. Tristan looked at the confirmation once more, then picked up the pen and signed. Over the next 6 months, Tristan became a feature of Delphine Aubert's professional world that was almost invisible and entirely indispensable. He didn't wear earpieces in client meetings or stand at parade rest outside her office door. He sat in the back of boardrooms with a laptop and a legal pad, looking like a junior analyst. He walked 3 steps behind her at industry events, looking like someone who was mildly lost. But he had rebuilt her entire transport protocol within the first 2 weeks. Rotating routes, variable timing, no predictable patterns. He had identified 2 contractors in Callister's security roster whose financial histories raised questions he put quietly in a memo to Delphine and never discussed again. He had flagged a gap in the building's camera coverage on the parking level and had it corrected without involving the facilities manager. Callister hated him with a focused and professional intensity. Every time Tristan identified a vulnerability Callister's team had missed, Callister filed a counter-memo questioning his methodology. Every time Tristan simplified a security protocol that had previously required 6 people and a great deal of radio traffic, Callister circulated a report about the value of established procedure. Tristan read the memos and didn't respond to any of them. In December, Delphine's firm was hosting the annual Northern Capital Summit Gala at the Fairmont Royal York on Front Street. It was a significant event, 400 guests, a list that included 3 federal cabinet ministers, 2 provincial premiers, and more institutional money than most countries' GDP. For Aubert Capital, it was the most visible moment of the year. For Tristan, the Royal York was a tactician's headache. 17 floors, 4 ballrooms, 11 private entrances, a kitchen operation the size of a small airport, and enough ambient noise to mask anything short of a structural collapse. He spent 2 days walking the venue before the event. He memorized the service elevator routes. He mapped every camera blind spot. He found a service stairwell on the east side of the building that exited directly to a side street on Wellington, kept it filed. On the night of the gala, Tristan stood near the second-floor mezzanine railing in a dark suit that fit properly for once, watching the room below with the patience of someone who had learned to make stillness a discipline rather than a choice. Delphine moved through the room with the confidence of a woman who owned every conversation she entered. She was in a deep green gown, her hair down for once. 2 of Callister's contracted security staff flanked her, both of them visible, both of them radiating alert tension, which Tristan had advised against, and Callister had overruled. At 9:30, Tristan's attention moved to the northern service corridor. There were 3 catering staff loading trolleys near the entrance, fine, standard, expected, and then a 4th and a 5th, who were not moving the way people move when they are managing food service logistics. Their weight was distributed forward. Their eyes moved to the upper levels repeatedly, not in the way of people looking for their supervisors. He keyed his radio. Callister, I have 2 service corridor contacts at the north entrance who don't fit the catering pattern. Their shoes are wrong, both wearing composite toe work boots under catering aprons. Caterers at this venue wear non-slip kitchen clogs, I confirmed with the events manager this morning. I'm moving to verify. Callister's voice came back clipped and immediate. Stand down, Hollis. They're cleared. Late kitchen rotation. Maintain visual on the principal. Tristan looked across the room to the security command station on the far mezzanine. Callister was standing behind the glass, looking not at Delphine, but at the north corridor. He felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a sudden, clear wrongness. Tristan dropped his earpiece into his pocket. He moved. He was already on the main floor when the lights went out. The Royal York's grand ballroom plunged into darkness for 3 full seconds before emergency lighting activated, casting everything in dim amber. 400 people in formal wear, some of them screaming, some of them simply frozen. Controlled chaos, and someone had planned it that way. Callister's voice came over the venue's PA system, commandingly calm, security protocol in effect. All VIP guests proceed to the North Assembly Point for extraction. Tristan was already running. Callister's 2 contractors had grabbed Delphine by the arms the moment the lights cut out. She was demanding to know where Tristan was. They were pulling her toward the north corridor. She dug her heels in once, twice, and then the fire door swung shut behind them, and the noise of the ballroom dropped away to nothing. The north corridor of the Royal York was paneled in dark wood and lit by low-wall sconces. It smelled of linen and old carpet. At the end of the hall, past the service elevator, 4 figures in catering aprons had shed their jackets to reveal tactical vests, and one of them was leveling a compact submachine gun at the approaching group. Behind them, in a charcoal suit, stood Raymond Callister. And slightly to his left, with the measured confidence of a man collecting a debt, stood Knox Dunbar. His jaw carried a slight asymmetry from where it had been struck 6 months ago. His eyes were absolutely fixed on the fire door through which Delphine and her escort were now entering. The 2 contractors released her. They stepped to either side, merging with the group behind Callister without a word. Delphine understood what had happened in a single, cold second. She had hired the wrong person to run her security department. Not the man from the training mat. Tristan had never been the wrong choice. Raymond Callister, who had spent 2 decades building her trust and had apparently, at some point in the last 18 months, decided that Meridian Group's offer was worth more than it. "This didn't need to be so complicated," Callister said. He sounded genuinely regretful, in the way that people do when they mean they're sorry. Things have come to a point where they must be inconvenienced. Meridian would have been reasonable. They still will be, with the board in control. "You are a coward, Raymond," Delphine said. Her voice was perfectly level. Dunbar racked the weapon in his hands. The sound filled the corridor. From the ventilation panel above the group, a panel Tristan had noted on his walkthrough 2 days prior, one that opened to a service crawl space running parallel to the corridor. A fire suppression canister came down hard. Not a small extinguisher. A full suppression unit from the corridor ceiling mount, dislodged with enough force to rupture on impact. White chemical agent exploded across the corridor. The lights, already dim, became meaningless. 5 men were coughing and shouting in a fog of white. Tristan dropped from the crawlspace access above the rearmost contractor. He landed without a sound and moved without hesitation. The tactical flashlight from his jacket, heavy aluminium, kept for exactly this possibility, struck the first contractor at the base of the skull. The man folded forward without a sound that the chaos around him couldn't absorb. Tristan stripped the sidearm from the falling man's holster. 2 suppressed shots. The 2 contractors who had handed Delphine over to this corridor went down before they registered the attack. One of the remaining men fired blind into the fog and struck a wall sconce. Glass showered the floor. Tristan was already below the shot, driving his shoulder into the man's knee at an angle that folded it inward. As the man dropped, Tristan caught his head on the way down, choking him out in 4 seconds. The chemical cloud was thinning. Through it, Dunbar found him. The big man came without sound, moving faster than anything his size should be able to move, swinging a right hand that was the same punch from the training mat 6 months ago. Hard, committed, aimed to end it immediately. Tristan ducked and moved inside. He didn't sweep the leg this time. He drove his open palm into Dunbar's solar plexus, and as the air rushed out of the man's lungs, he grabbed Dunbar by the vest, planted his foot, and rolled backward, a sacrifice throw that used Dunbar's entire body weight as the mechanism. Dunbar launched over him and landed head-first against the paneled corridor wall with a sound that would leave a mark in the wood. Dunbar slid down the wall and didn't move. Only Callister remained. He had backed against the far wall, holding a small handgun in both hands, pointing it at Tristan with the look of a man discovering, too late, that he had built his entire plan around a version of events that no longer existed. "Don't," Callister said. "I will shoot." Tristan raised his empty hands and walked toward him slowly. "You're going to put the gun down, Raymond," he said. His voice was the same quiet it had always been. "And then you're going to give a very complete account of your arrangement with Meridian to the officers who are currently 3 minutes from this building. Or you're going to make a decision you won't survive in any environment I'm present in. Your choice." Callister fired. The shot hit the wall. Tristan closed the remaining distance, caught the weapon at the cylinder with his left hand and stripped it backward, and put Callister against the wall by his collar with the other. "Wrong choice," he said softly. "Try again." Callister chose correctly the second time. The Toronto Police Service arrived 7 minutes later. By then, Tristan had secured all 6 individuals in the corridor using zip ties from the emergency kit he'd noted in a cabinet on his walkthrough, and Delphine was sitting on a bench by the service elevator with her shoes off and a glass of water someone had handed her from somewhere. She watched Tristan give a statement to the first officer on scene with the same economical precision he brought to everything else. Factual, sequential, useful. He didn't editorialize. He didn't mention what Callister had said or what Dunbar had looked like when he hit the wall. He simply told them what happened. When the officer moved on to take measurements, Delphine walked over to him. She looked, for the first time since he had known her, slightly unguarded. "Are you all right?" she said. "Fine." He looked at her with the same directness he always had. "You?" "I've had better evenings." She paused. "Where did you come from? You dropped out of the ceiling." "Crawl space above the north corridor. I flagged it on my walkthrough report. It's in the memo I sent you on Tuesday." She looked at him for a long moment. "Of course it is." She straightened her gown. "The police will want a longer statement. You should stay." "I'll send them a written account tonight," Tristan said. He was already looking at the exit. "I can be reached in the morning." Tristan. The use of his first name made him look back. She rarely used it. "Where are you going?" He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a pair of small purple wool mittens, slightly more crumpled than they had been that morning, and held them up briefly. "Addie's visiting hours at the hospital end at 10:30, he said. "She's in the pre-operative ward. She likes when I read to her before she falls asleep." A pause. "I told her I wouldn't be late." He pushed through the service exit and out into the December cold of Wellington Street, the city noise swallowing him immediately, the lights of the CN Tower burning orange through the winter sky above the rooftops. Delphine stood in the corridor for a long moment after the door swung shut, surrounded by the quiet aftermath of a very expensive evening, and thought that she had hired exactly the right person. Some people carry the weight of everything they love in plain sight. They hold it in their hands the whole time, even when everyone else in the room assumes it makes them weak. That is, in fact, why no one sees them coming until it is far too late.